A dead Marine, two more on trial. The thin line between freedom and a life sentence at Leavenworth are three Naval JAG officers. With the odds stacked against them, and the evidence stacked even higher, there remains one fundamental truth to this no-win situation. The man responsible has enough political sway and military authority to sink the careers of all who reside in the courtroom. This is Monologue Dialogue. Alrighty, welcome to Monologue Dialogue, the podcast where we dive into some of pop culture's most historic and iconic monologues. I'm your host, Paul Nicolosi, and today, as always, I am joined by my buddy.
Oh, me? Oh, hey, Marco Saldana.
Yes, you
Hello.
fool. Of course you. This guy. What can I say about this guy that hasn't been said already? As you know, every week we discuss various pop culture monologues. This week we have a real special one for you because this is one that is very near and dear to my heart, and I know Marco shares the same sentiments. Marco, do you want to tell him what we're covering today?
Ooh, we're covering the ever so popular and almost very well known scene from A Few Good Men, the Colonel Jessup "I don't give a damn" speech. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of that. You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall.
Yeah. Oh,
We're covering some fun stuff today. Full disclosure, this topic might get a little heated. Marco and I, while we share a mutual love for this movie in general, we are both military service members. We've had some time in the military. We've had some time as our careers cross paths. And a lot of times we met certain individuals who maybe real life was mirroring the arts at times or was a reflection of the arts. So, and we're going to share some of our 2 cents. Of course, we're not going to mention anyone's names, but we might talk about a topic or two that could be a little sensitive in nature, could be a little triggering to some. So I fully understand if you click off. If
certainly triggering for us, but we won't click off.
Yeah, we're not gonna click off. We're fully triggered for you because we found a way to monetize our pain for your enjoyment and amusement, and that's what we're here to do today. So why don't we go ahead and begin? We're gonna set the scene for you. As you know, we are covering A Few Good Men. And in particular, we're talking about the monologue at the end of the movie. Colonel Jessup is a witness that has been called to testify over the death of this one PFC that was within his unit, PFC in the Marine Corps. They're stationed down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And this is set during relatively peacetime. There was still a bit of a shaky tension between the U.S. and Cuba at the time. And one private first class was not quite up to snuff. He was falling behind in runs. He was struggling. He was on that struggle bus, right? But he also
For legitimate reasons too, by the way, actual medical reasons.
Absolutely, yes. So, and he was voicing those concerns, and they were often being overlooked. And finally, he writes the right person in the proper channels of authority, jumping the chain of command. He wrote outside of his chain of command to write a letter, and in it, he said he's willing to testify to a potential fence. It was an unsanctioned firing across the fence, and this got sent back to his commander, Colonel Nathan R. Jessup. And of course, rather than send the young man home, he decided he had a moral obligation to train the soldier. And he was going to train him with a little bit of peer-to-peer training.
For those that don't know, jumping the chain of command, even in today's military, is still a very taboo thing. It's a big no-no.
Yeah.
That's why, the severe reactions could be construed. Yeah.
Yeah, typically you want to handle things at the lowest level in the military.
Mm,
We're going to jump more into that conversation in a little bit, but thank you for bringing that up. So he goes outside the chain of command. He writes some government entity, his congressman, or a bunch of other people. This gets back to his leadership, who decides he wants to make an example of the boy, right? And he's going to have it done through a little peer to peer training. Um, in this situation, the movie calls it a code red. Now, years later, and we have the hindsight of what 20 plus years, almost 30 years now, more than 30. We
yeah.
call it hazing now in the military. Still very much a big no-no. You really shouldn't do it. Does it happen? Absolutely. It happens every day as the sun rises and sets over God's American army. And it's one of those things. Uh, just speaking from the army perspective, I can't speak for the other branches. And while we're not condoning any of these actions, and this is where the discussion is going to come in a little bit later, as a result, this young man had a medical concern, and it creates a body's chemical reaction where he basically drowns in his own fluid inside of his lungs. And as a result, the two gentlemen who were ordered to perform the code red are on trial for what is presumed to be an intentional murder of the individual. They think there's poison on the rag because medically it's inconclusive. And the one piece of potential evidence that they have is the testimony of a man who ends up self-deleting, we'll say, because we're putting this on YouTube. Um, so it is up to a young hotshot JAG attorney played by Tom Cruise. And his role in this is, he was kind of pinned and saddled with this case to settle it quietly. And the more he investigates and the more he's goaded on by other people involved in the scene, or in the movie, I should say, he decides to take the case to trial, knowing that in all likelihood they're going to lose. He feels like these two men need their day in court because, in the long and short of it, they were following orders. Now, it's questionable whether or not it was an ethical order and whether or not the conditions permitted for them to question this order in the first place. And that's what a lot of the movie dives into.
A quick irony, Paul, is that even though the Tom Cruise character turns out to be one heck of a lawyer, he himself, like the victim, was not a good service member.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, we're gonna talk a little bit about the character of Nathan Jessup, Colonel Jessup. Colonel Jessup is like the poster boy of what military service should look like. Decorated Vietnam
Yeah,
veteran, turned leader, rose through the ranks much higher than some of his peers, and we'll talk a little bit more about why we think that was, how many skeletons he probably had in his closet as a result. And this isn't the first instance he probably disobeyed a direct order and commanded his troops the way he saw fit. And it's probably not the first time that the wink link was culled from the herd, but he certainly got caught this time, didn't he?
he did. He did. He stepped in it.
Yeah, stepped in it is a very succinct way of putting that. Um, so we're gonna jump into it. So at this point, these two young men are on trial, and the long shot play of this JAG lawyer, played by Tom Cruise, is to call Colonel Jessup to the stand. And guess what, guys? I didn't draw the short straw this time. I don't need to act this week. Today it's going to be my good friend Marco Saldana. Marco, are you excited?
I am. I am. I've actually used snips and pieces of this in real life, so uh, yeah, I won't do it exactly like the great Jack Nicholson, but I'll definitely put my own little flair on it.
I don't think many people can do it quite the way Jack Nicholson did, but if you can just give me a tenth, just a minor iota of that raw power and energy that he performs in this scene. Also, go ahead.
Ask for a lot, sir. You're asking for a lot. I'll do what I can. I'll
I
tell you that much.
just try your best. I believe in you. Don't let your dreams be
Yo,
dreams.
college try.
This is your moment. If it makes you feel more comfortable, just imagine that I'm naked.
Oh god, no. Let's just dive into it. Did you want to start it off or?
I believe it's your line first, buddy.
Oh, right. All right, here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1. I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth. Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns. Who's gonna do it? You? You, Lieutenant Weinberg? I have a greater responsibility than you could possibly fathom. You weep for Santiago, and you curse the Marines. You have that luxury. You have that luxury of not knowing what I know, that Santiago's death, while tragic, probably saved lives, and my existence, while grotesque and incomprehensible to you, saves lives. You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't want to talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. We use words like honor, code, loyalty. We use these words as the backbone of a life spent defending something. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of freedom that I provide, and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just say thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, I suggest you pick up a weapon and stand a post. Either way, I don't give a damn what you think you are entitled to. And cut.
Cinema, as the kids say. I don't know if you've seen that meme. I've seen that meme. I watch a lot of internets. Oh, chills, buddy.
Drop
Absolute.
the mic or just knock over my mic. All right, I'm done. All right, good night now.
Yeah, good night. All right, show's over. Marco, I gotta. It's my golf
That's
clap,
all right.
buddy. That's my golf clap.
Yeah.
You did very well. I'm proud of you. I'm also not gonna immediately tell you you sound like a British schoolboy immediately after, because that would be deflating and emasculating. I wouldn't do that to you.
I was in no way, shape, or form a British schoolboy, sir.
I'm glad you think that. And you know what? I got to be honest with you. I assumed you were going to go into this and you were just going to like, all right, a little bit of peek behind the scenes when we rehearsed this. You were just like, you just read it like you didn't want to be there, like it was your court-ordered appointed service. and and I was like, is that how you're gonna do it? And you're like, yeah, I mean, whatever.
My
Just
voice.
yeah,
What are you talking
uh-huh.
about?
So I had in here in my show notes, I'm going to discuss major props to Jack Nicholson, who, despite only appearing in 3 brief scenes of this film, dominates and controls the attention of moviegoers. And I had that in here as an out for you. Like, yeah, you know what? It didn't matter if you tried or didn't because you wouldn't have held a candle. But I got to be honest with you, that wasn't terrible.
Thank
That,
you.
that
Thank
was
you. I was going for not terrible.
that was pretty acceptable, I would say.
I was definitely going for not British schoolboy, and I believe the audience would agree.
Well, you know what? Next time we pick one where you have an accent. How about that?
Oh
Uh,
goodness gracious! I might not. I might be sick on that one.
be all right. You'd be fine. Alrighty. So, first off, like I said, golf clap for Marco. He did a fantastic performance there. And he claps for himself. He's so humble. He's the most humble. He tells me all the time.
You gotta have props for yourself, man. Otherwise, nobody will do it for you.
That's true. You have to be your biggest advocate. I have learned that time and time again. Now, as we mentioned in the beginning of this discussion, this was more in the planning side of it. The more we talked about how we were going to approach this week's episode, we started drawing conclusions that, we met a lot of people in our military service. While they may have not committed such acts that have resulted in the death of a service member, for sure they're just as bad. And given under the right circumstances or given enough power, could potentially lead to a situation like this, because they do have this mentality of Colonel Jessup. And believe it or not, there are a lot of folks out there who see Jessup as the hero. Marco, what is your take on that?
Well, like we were talking earlier, and like we're talking now, Colonel Jessup for us, great character, great portrayal by Jack Nicholson, but this guy, this officer, Colonel Jessup, does exist. He exists in many ways, in many shapes, throughout the genders as well, both male and female, throughout, all of the rank structure through the military, not just the Marines, not just the Army, the Air Force as well. No branch is exempt from it. Uh, and what's the most disturbing for me about this is uh, that Colonel Jessup is in a position where he has one great political sway, great political influence, and great authority. Literal authority to order troops to their death if, it comes to such things, right? To open armed conflict with Cuba in this particular case. He does have that authority, but with this particular kid, because just to kind of backstep here, he goes outside the chain of command. He's having issues, and no one is taking him serious. And by going outside the chain of command, ooh, you see, even you're not like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. But now he ended up on the boss's radar, and the boss did not take a liking to this.
Yeah, I'm
You know, like
actually
the
I'm glad you actually mentioned the whole boss's radar because there's actually, and I'm going to talk about a separate monologue for a second. But when Lieutenant Colonel Markinson is writing a letter, which ultimately ends
yeah,
up being his self-delete letter, he is writing to the parents of PFC Santiago, the young man who had died in this tragic event. And he says, I knew your son very little, which is to say, I knew him by name. I knew his name only. And that's the craziest thing. Jessup, as you mentioned, this kid wasn't on his radar until he decided to go outside the chain of command. Now, to be fair, he wasn't getting anywhere within his chain of command.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. Well, even Colonel Jessup says he wrote letters to everyone and except Santa Claus.
Yeah. But likely he maybe didn't take it any higher than maybe platoon sergeant, platoon leader level. At that level, he probably didn't take it higher. At the end of the day, and I hate to say this, Colonel Jessup is right. He shouldn't have been the last person in the room to find out what was going on here with this young kid. But at the same time,
Sadly,
you can also
I mean, kind of agree.
you can state, well, who does that responsibility fall on? Does that fall on the kid, or does that ultimately fall on command leadership? Who's truly at fault for that?
Well, so with the Colonel Jessups that are out there, they do exist. We've seen them. You and I have seen them. We served together, and they existed in both, the lower ranks all the way up to the ones that, that you have to salute. And uh, and it wasn't easy. You know, you know about things that happened. I know about things that happened, and we all did the best that we could at the time, just like this kid. This kid was trying to do the best he can, but sometimes it doesn't go up higher than the 1-2 person in your immediate chain of command. Why? Because they're not interested or committed in doing anything
Or in a
about
lot of cases, they don't want to get involved sometimes. Sometimes they're saddled with
yeah.
the leadership responsibility, but they're like, ooh, I don't want to touch
they
that
they
one.
have they have they have their own political agendas, at that point.
Yeah.
They get a little taste of that power, and it's like, I got my own stuff to worry about. It took me everything I had to get here, and now I have to stay here. That's the catch with power, you know. Yeah, you spend, uh, you know, at least in my personal experience, because I've served in leadership, I've clawed my way up to points of the top, and once you get up there, uh you just spend most of your time trying to defend yourself to stay there. You know, for me, I ended up seeing things for what they were, and the politics of being in a leadership position like Colonel Jessup. It isn't easy. Okay, everyone is gunning for you. Everyone second guesses you.
Both above and below. I would.
That's above and below.
Yeah.
Yes, you're totally right. And you know that is the burden of leadership. And I mean, it in a certain way, I can understand why Colonel Jessup said, "Well, we're going to train the guy. You know, we're going to rough him up and make him fly straight." Sadly, things happened, and you know the kid ended up dying, and very sad. But what did he do instead of learning from this event, instead of owning the event? In the brief time that we see Colonel Jessup, he decides to sidestep his stuff. Why? Because he spent his entire career getting to where he wants to go, and he's not going to let this little private first class no one mess this up. See, and you and I know this. We've seen these guys.
Yeah.
Okay, not just guys. There are ladies as well. You know, equal opportunity. You know, folks have their own agendas. See? And it's difficult, and you know it's hard for me to talk about too, because even my family has heard stories about that. I wish we could disclose more about it, but we can't, obviously. And it it gets you in a particular mood. It gets me in a particular mood because we did the best that we could with the circumstances that were presented. And some would argue we did what we could. We know we did the best. You know, we could have done more, and that's what haunts us. It's like I could have done more. I should have done more.
Yeah. You're
In the
right.
end, you know, we're like this kid. He did what he could, you know?
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but you're taking the words right out of my mouth. Because when we entered this discussion, um, and we kind of planned out what we were going to talk about here, we
It's very hard not to be specific.
and we discussed some of the specifics, and for me, it brought back places I didn't want to necessarily be in again. It brought me, it showed me a side of myself that I didn't want to see anymore because, as you mentioned, you know, we did everything we could and we probably could have done more. Particular incidences that we're discussing happened maybe 4 years into my career, 5 years into my career, 6 years into my career. And right now I'm at year 13 going on 14, right? And so I know now, especially with the higher rank now, I know way more, infinitely more than I did when I was a PFC or a specialist, right? And having witnessed what I witnessed and knowing the actual empowerment that I had at the time, I it's hard at that point to squarely blame aggressors in that situation. And at that point, I honestly, the only word I can attribute to it is guilt. I wish I had been better knowledge, and I can use the excuse now. Well, you know, I've had years of hindsight to catch me up, and I'm going to be a better leader in the future. But that doesn't make right what happened in the past, and that
No.
it's you and I, this might be where we differ. I'm not really sure, and we're going to get into that. But for me, squarely, I look at it and I hold myself responsible first and foremost for being a bystander who did nothing or did the best they could, but I could have taken it so much further. But what are your thoughts on that? Or do you want to talk details?
Well, I mean, this is where we can make a little bit of, you know, different comparisons. You know, you, Paul, for the audience that doesn't know, you serve with the enlisted side of the house. Okay. And you have been a private Santiago, private first class Santiago. I knew you when you were PFC Nicolosi. See, I remember that.
I was slow. I had chest pains. Like I couldn't breathe.
See, and there's a few other characters in this particular, movie that I identify with, because there's the platoon commander, Lieutenant Kendrick. I was a platoon commander. Okay, I was also an executive officer, like Colonel was it Markinson
Markinson,
or
yes, Lieutenant
Markinson?
Colonel Markinson.
And I've also been a commander, maybe not at the level of Colonel Jessup, but definitely I've commanded battalion-sized elements, and I have felt that immense responsibility where everyone is second guessing you and gunning you, and then you have things that happen from your own side of the house, and you're like, "What are you doing?" Like kids make the dumbest decisions. You know this. We've been there. We've lived it. We've lived it. Okay. And then at the same time, from a responsibility perspective, you're like, I have to answer for this guy. All right. And then you turn around, and then now you're getting it from above as well. And the folks that are there that are supposed to mentor you and guide you, okay, the senior officers like Colonel Jessup, okay, or senior enlisted personnel, folks that we know that are supposed to take the helm and say, look, like this, do it like this, or go this way, you know? What do? They turn on you. Okay, then they throw you under the bus to protect their own skin.
Mm.
They do what Colonel Jessup did, and they order a cool red on you.
Mm.
Maybe not overtly where, folks come at you in the middle of the night, but they come at you in different ways. They come at you with the pen, and you know this as well as I do.
Yeah, it's a little more of a veiled threat or an implication rather than a physical retribution. Um, I completely get that. Um, from from my perspective, since you mentioned that we were on both sides of the same house, from my perspective, since you mentioned the young kid that you might have to be responsible for, and you have to answer to that, um, I was expecting you to say you have the Colonel Jessups who come in and then they teach you how to sidestep this potential individual rather than to, get them trained up and get them on to speed and get the metrics looking good. Because that's really what the military is. It's just hunting metrics.
So yes, yes, yes. So you know what? I will tell you, and I'll share with the audience. Obviously, I'm not going to name specifics, but this did happen to me. One of those Colonel Jessups that did not tell me, "Hey, don't do this," did flat out tell me, "I'm not going to burn for your mistakes."
Mm.
All right, my commander. Okay, this was at a point in my young career where I'm still learning the military. I'm still learning the ropes, you know, and we were conducting a field exercise, which I was in charge of. Okay. And the person in charge above us did not agree with the way we were doing things. That is their prerogative as a commander. You and I know this, right? But instead of saying, hey, I have a problem with this is how I want you to fix it, he said, this is wrong. Okay. And if someone gets hurt, I'm going to get you, not me, you.
Mm.
That was verbatim. Verbatim. Okay. Now, I didn't have, a few guys come at me in the middle of the night, but believe me, I felt the knife at my neck. Oh my God, I better watch what I do because if something happens, I'm the one who's going to take the rap for this. It was made very clear.
And so, Marco, since we're on the topic of um, that specific leader who said they weren't going to burn for you, they weren't going to. It sounds like to me what they're saying is they're not going to assume any responsibility for what's underneath them and underneath their command. They are not willing to risk what they've attained at this point in their career over something that, they could put in an ounce of effort and help to rectify. Um,
Yeah, that's why they got the title. Yeah.
so since we're talking about that individual, because you and I have conferred and we know who we're talking about. Um, I
We were
had,
both there.
yeah, I had a particular experience. Now, I did not have the perspective that you had, but I was able to come to that conclusion without having those words said to me. And I'm not saying I'm smarter or anything. What I'm saying is it was in his actions, it was in his statements that he would say around the junior enlisted, right? I remember when that gentleman took command and we had to do, if for those of you who don't know, you have to do an inventory. Anytime someone is assuming command, they are ultimately responsible for every piece of equipment that has a serial number or an NSN on it.
Personally and financially.
Personally, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. They are both personally and financially responsible. Now, that's a big deal, and I can forgive that. I can forgive his approach and his attitude regarding that. But we had to inventory these, what were essentially medic bags, right? There was probably 10 or so that ended up still being missing when they all got turned in. A lot of folks who hadn't turned them in, they had a list of who it was associated with. Most of them were long gone from the military, but someone forgot to collect their gear on the way out. And that's a financial mess to mitigate. But then we also,
Mark it on the list.
yeah. But then we also had to inventory what we had, because a lot of the bags, even though the hard ticket items like the bag itself, the straps, the blood pressure cuffs, the scopes, and all sorts of medical goodies, right? Most of them were there, and then some bags were missing onesie twosie items. And his attitude about it, that he was very verbal, and maybe he shouldn't have shown these cards, but he said, "Well, I'm not going to sign for him unless you guys fix this." And while I understand that, um, you don't necessarily need to show the soldiers your attitude about it. You have to be careful at that level when it comes to the optics piece. And you would think at his level, at his rank, he would know that. And maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing, but he didn't need to tell me he's not going to burn for me. You know, he didn't.
Yeah.
All he had to show was that he was not understanding of, hey, guess what? Things go missing. We're in the army. We're in the business of warfare. Okay. Sometimes when we train to the standard. And sometimes that means you lose equipment along the way. And there are processes for writing off the cost of those items. And rather than
Yes.
go down
Yes.
the hard
Yes.
road and fill out the paperwork for that, this man was willing to stand among a bunch of junior enlisted that didn't know who he was. We just met this cat this weekend, and he said, I'm not going to be responsible. I'm not going to sign for these things. We're not going to find the correct solution. In so many ways, he's saying, I don't care where you find it, you find the
Fix.
equipment we're missing. And what does that
Fix it
leave
somehow.
us with? What are we going to steal it? Are we going to go buy it ourselves? In many cases, a lot of soldiers had to go and buy these stupid headlamps and put them in the bag because they were missing. So I
Yeah,
just wanted to share
elegant
my piece of
solution,
that.
not exactly the right answer, but yes, you're right. You're right, Paul. The army does have processes of rectifying missing equipment. Uh, you know, there is everything. The army does have systems in place to do these things. Uh, and if that in particular individual just said, okay, all right, well, what do we have? What do we know? Let's do the paperwork. Let's just work the process, right? Own it instead of just trying to kick the can, you know, just go from there. Now, the thing about leadership is that particular piece of that individual. Yeah.
Yes.
I know the particular piece that I lived. See? Now put yourself in the Colonel Jessup position. Now you got to make a judgment call.
Mm.
based off of
Mm.
some really crappy information. And welcome to leadership, at least in the military, and
Crash course leadership 101. I told you we should have had a leadership podcast. What can I say?
it, it's a and, and and not to defend Colonel Jessup, because no, the thing where Colonel Jessup went wrong is that in his speech, you know, he listed all the things I do, how I do them, but he never said I was wrong. I was wrong. I made a mistake. I should have done that. He tried. He tried to cover up his tracks in not so very flattering ways, as the movie shows. And what ended up happening, he falls into that trap that Lieutenant Kathy sets for him. And but see, that was the ultimate failure. Instead of learning from the mistake, figuring out the process to rectify it correctly, whether the results were good or not, he chose to do what a lot of other commanders do, and just, I'm not going to sign for it. You fix it. I don't care how you do it. Just do it. Literally. And then things happen, and things don't always go well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned. So, getting back to the film, Lieutenant Caffey kind of sets this trap for him, and that piece comes shortly after the lines of dialogue that Marco shared with us. I'm so proud. Yay, Marco. Uh, it- he, there's this element underneath the surface where it's never really spoken between these two characters before, but Kathy, a young junior grade officer in a completely separate branch, right? Too, he's in the Navy. He is the polar opposite of this decorated war veteran, and even
Yeah.
he can tell that you know Colonel Jessup wants to say it. He wants to admit that no one should be able to tell him how to run his unit, how to run
Mm,
that group of soldiers. And the fact that, the Pentagon or some politician would have the stones to meddle in his affairs is what he finds most offensive, right? And Caffey's able to get him to admit that portion of guilt on the stand as a witness. Uh, does it ultimately clear his soldiers of all wrongdoings? As we know, it does not.
does
Um,
not.
it does clear them of murder. And
Conspiracy to commit murder.
yeah,
Yeah.
murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Thank you. It clears them of both of those things, but it doesn't clear them of conduct unbecoming. And that's kind of the final point of the movie is that you're, at least to me, what I read from this and what I take from this as a military service member, I don't know if you agree, but you're going to come across these types of people. You're going to come across these Colonel Jessups. You're going to come across these orders that are not ethical. You're going to come across orders that you should be empowered to question. I'm not saying it's carte blanche, you can question all orders, especially at the junior level. You have to be very careful. You need to know the difference between right and wrong. But if a superior officer or a senior level NCO is telling you, hey, go break into his room in the middle of the night and tie him up with duct tape and shove a rag down his throat because we're going to teach him how to be a real Marine,
Yeah. Teach
maybe
him what's what.
maybe don't do that. Maybe that's a no-no that falls into the unethical side of orders. And that to me is the main takeaway I gain from that is you have to be willing to not only disregard or disobey those types of orders, but then you need to be able to back it up. And you need to be able to stand for that. And that's ultimately by the end of the movie, even though they were cleared of murder and conspiracy to commit, they're still dishonorably discharged from the military. Uh,
It's funny because the defendants, the look on their face when they get that verdict, they're just astonished.
Yeah.
and I think it was Lance Corporal
Dawson.
Downey,
The
Dawson,
Dawson,
Downey, Dawson.
Downey and Dawson, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
You're making me question it.
the look on his face where he's surprised and then he realizes what exactly he did, and then that moment where he accepted, and then his buddy's like, well, what did we do wrong? We did nothing wrong. And he's like, no, we did, you know, this is what we did.
We were supposed to be the ones who defend Willie. Willie is the first name of PFC
Yeah,
Santiago.
yeah, poor guy.
Yeah.
But that was a tough one, and I mean, now we're kind of drifting away from the monologue, but how that whole movie ended with them being escorted out. Uh, Lance Corporal Dawson turns to Lieutenant Caffey, and Caffey tells him, "Hey, you don't need a patch on your on your uniform, on your arm to signify that you have honor."
Mm.
Just kind of low key telling him, you know, you you tried, you did what you could, but you know, you're still a good guy. You messed up, but you're still a good guy in some way. Uh,
I
that
don't
was
I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't think it detracts from the monologue at all. In fact, the monologue in itself is so powerful that it sets up these other moments, right? I mean, it's most famous for Jack Nicholson's performance. Everyone has a
mhm.
great monologue in this film. If you guys have
You
not
do.
seen A Few Good Men, it was hard because, like, we both went into it saying Colonel Jessup, and then we both watched the film. We're like, I was second guessing. I was like, hey, what about, Tom Cruise has a great monologue here. Demi Moore has fantastic monologues here. Kevin Pollak, right? Lieutenant Sam Weinberg, he's the comic relief of the film. But even he has great monologues in this film, but none of them hold a candle to Colonel Jessup's. And I think the reason for that is less about the performance and more about how it complements the entire movie around it, how it complements the scene you just discussed, where we're talking about this man, this Colonel Jessup, who thinks he's doing the absolute right thing and the honorable thing. And he's sitting there saying, all you did was you just weakened a nation today. Oh, that's all you did, right? And he's speaking as if he has honor, which he clearly threw in the trash the minute he tried to pin the death of this young soldier on two other subordinates rather than own the situation and take responsibility, all for political gain. That is not honor. And I
Yeah.
think that monologue is set up purposely to highlight that major difference. Everyone else in that room has true honor, except for the
Mhm.
biggest rank and the brightest star in the room.
Yeah, ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's almost almost the butt of a cruel joke, because we both know that there are Colonel Jessups out there, and they I don't know about getting away with murder or anything, but does justice ever really catch up to them? Not in the way we see it in this particular movie. If anything, it's the reverse. What happens? They get promoted, you know,
Yeah.
and they go on to bigger positions of authority, and they get more responsibility and more power.
Where they can cause more damage and tertiary
Dude,
damage. It's
a lot of collateral damage.
mind you, we're not I know how this sounds. This sounds like we're sitting here with the hindsight of our careers and we're like, "Oh man, there's a whole lot of bad out there." The good far outweighs the bad in the military. I don't know if you agree with me, but
There's a lot of good points. There's a lot of bad points too. There's good and bad, but you know what? I mean, without getting all cliche, I mean that's kind of life, right?
yeah.
I mean, you got to make the best of everything, learn from stuff, good and bad.
Yep.
Uh, you know, it's just ironic that, like you said, the biggest the biggest rank there, the person who should know the best was the absolute worst.
Yeah.
That is ironic, wouldn't you agree?
Yep. Yep.
You
Sure
know,
is.
and in the real world, instead of facing justice, no, they get promoted.
But
Mm.
and and to my comment that I was making, it in my belief, and maybe I'm being naive, like I said, there's more good than bad in leadership. However, you only ever hear about the bad, and you only ever see the bad because the bad is loud and the bad is very brash and abrasive, and it leaves a lasting impression. The pitfall you get into with that is sometimes you assume all of it's bad. But don't let the one bad apple spoil the bunch. Don't let the Colonel Jessup ruin you from the other great key military leaders in the world today.
Yeah, no, there's some
That's
good ones out there. Sure.
yeah, one in particular. He's all right. So at this point, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Just a quick recap. I mean, we kind of introduced you guys to the setting and the scene behind A Few Good Men. Marco, once again, round of applause for this gentleman. He did a fantastic job as Colonel Jessup. Almost a little too real, guys. Almost.
Yeah.
But
Don't set any roses or nothing.
don't throw roses, just throw money.
Yeah,
Speaking of which, if you could like, comment, subscribe, keep those comments coming because every once in a while we get a pretty good idea come across, and it's something that's outside of the box, and we want those. We want the challenging ones. So hit us with your best monologues, and we'll do our best. We'll do our best to represent. Go ahead and share with your friends as well. Who knows? Maybe if you like us, your friends and your family would like us just as much.
Ooh, may I say real quick, shout out to the folks over in Brownsville, Texas, where you know some good views.
Yes, absolutely.
Unofficial comments, but yeah.
Somehow in our YouTube metrics, and I pulled this up, like 68% of our viewers hail from Brownsville, Texas, and I couldn't possibly know why. Who somehow we reached the good folks of Brownsville, and we're proud of that. We're absolutely proud of that.
I was born in Harlingen, Texas, so I wouldn't know.
Look, you and I both know that you got some wonderful folks down there and some wonderful family, and we love their feedback too. We
Yes.
love their feedback. Someone said to be more animated, and I'm over here trying to be loosey goosey. Okay, I hope I made a certain somebody proud today. That's all I have to say. And if I didn't, let me know.
We'll wait. We'll wait for the feedback, official or otherwise. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us. And we look forward to doing this again with you. Today on Monologue Dialogue, we discuss the heart-racing performance of Jack Nicholson as Colonel Nathan R. Jessup, the primary antagonist and chief scene chewer of Rob Reiner's courtroom drama, A Few Good Men. Join us next week as we continue our villain streak, only this time with a bit of comic book mischief. Until then, I'm Paul Nicolosi, and remember, behind every monologue, there's a dialogue worth having.